Hello everyone, I'm Don Alexander, and I'm going to share with you today a few thoughts about the 5 principles of Reiki. In consciousness is created extension, which we perceive as space. The 5 elements of experience, our experience of the world within and the world without, the inner world of our experience, and the outer world which we experience. The 5 elements are symbols. They symbolize the different ways in which we apprehend the world. They give us a way of describing the world as experience. The combination of all of these modes of perceiving, earth, water, fire, air, and space, synthesized by consciousness, the nervous system and the brain, lends a sense of reality to the body and its world. Movement is symbolized by the element of air. It's our perception of movement which gives us our sense of time and helps space appear real. The fire element is our sense of temperature, the relative warmth or coolness of places and things. The fire element gives us our experience of the power and the force of nature and life. And just as dust, or the flour from which we make bread, is held together, made coherent, non-chaotic by adding water, so the water element symbolizes that idea of coherence. From the element of water, coherence, we derive our perception of shapes and patterns, from which we are able to name and recognize places and things. Finally, the sense that we have of things being hard, solid, is called the earth element. The fifth element is that element of experience which we call space or awareness, our awareness of space. The great sages of all times, all ages, speak of self-luminous awareness, into which, in time, intrude desire and resistance, liking and disliking, love and hate, spiraling downwards, darkening and overclouding the pristine clarity of primordial mind. Reiki, universal and primordial conscious energy, ever and everywhere present. Usui Reiki, on the other hand, is the practice and teaching of Usui Sensei from Japan, designed to help us realign with our original and indivisible wholeness and health, and of which the Gokai, or 5 precepts of life, are an important part. You know, when I first met with Reiki, I was impressed by these few remarkable words. That the 5 precepts, the Gokai, are the secret method of achieving full happiness and the miraculous cure for all of our ills. The 5 precepts of Reiki were taught by Master Usui, who was born in Japan in 1865 and who died there in 1926. So I asked myself, how could it be that these 5 simple, everyday principles could be miraculous? For a long time, hundreds of years, Japan had been virtually cut off from the rest of the world. And now suddenly, in 1868, they decided to bring Japan into the modern world. Buddhism had been imported from India, China, Korea. Confucianism had come from China, Taoism had come from China, and the small outposts of Christianity had come from the West. What was essentially Japanese was the Shinto religion. But for a long, long time, the teachings and the principles of Shinto had become combined with Buddhism combined with Taoism, and all together were practiced very powerfully by the Shugenja. These principles, or these precepts, came from the ascetic branch, the Shugendo branch of Tendai. Do not bear anger, for anger is illusion. Do not be worried, because fear is distraction. Be true to your way and your being. Show compassion to yourself and others. This is the center of Buddhahood. Now, in Japan, for hundreds of years, there was a tradition of hands-on healing. And the greatest healers were the Shugenja, because they went off into the mountains and dedicated themselves to a practice which spontaneously developed healing power in their hands. Now, the emperor and the government wanted to bring Japan into the modern world. And they had such a strong culture of natural healing that they decided, well, the only way is to make this form of practice absolutely illegal. And then when the government imposed very restrictive rules for the monks and nuns in the temples, why, the samurai, either dressed as monks or not, would run down the mountain with their swords and cause a lot of trouble in the town. Well, it was very true that the practice in the mountains never stopped. But people had to go further and further back into the mountains. And as new roads were built, so they had to go still further into the wilds. So, when Usui Sensei went into the mountains to practice, he couldn't stand on top of the mountain and shout to the world, you know, this is what I'm doing, because his practice was illegal. Nowadays, of course, it's not illegal to practice, but in the time of Usui, it had to be kept very private. I believe that this is the reason why the form, the precise form of these precepts was changed from the older form of the Shugenja. Can you understand that this is the atmosphere, this is the epoch at which Usui himself began his practice? But just for today, my purpose of going into Japanese history is to describe the times and the spirit of the times of Usui Sensei. So what I want to say comes from the last of these precepts, that the essential practice is to remind ourselves, to remember that that is who we are. We are Buddha. If, for instance, you're Christians, you could just as truly say, this is to remind us that we are Christ. Everyday thoughts, we tend to separate ourselves from the highest. Christ is up there somewhere, the Buddha is up there somewhere, and I am down here. And this is our misunderstanding. And so the purpose of these precepts, both the Reiki precepts and the precepts of the Shugenja, are to remind us of who we truly are. Reiki is both an art of healing and an art of living, and it has its source in the transcendent. It arose from Usui Sensei's practice on the mountain of meditation, fasting, but universal energy, transcendent energy, is nothing if it's not brought down to this earth. Reiki is brought down to earth by people such as you and me. It's we who manifest the healing power of Reiki on this earth. I'm not speaking here of an outer show of spirituality or goodness or putting on an act. Far from it. No, what I'm speaking of is a certain grace and charm which emerges from within. And lifts our heart upwards. And as we continue to practice Reiki, healing, and the 5 precepts, so we reach our true spiritual potential. So we reach upwards within our heart. Just for today, no anger. Just for today, don't be angry. Now, where have you ever met someone who can practice that? Have you ever come across such a person? They do exist, I assure you. But it's not 1 in a million who can practice for a whole day not being angry. Now, some people say, well, I'm fine, I never get angry, except with my husband. If you had to live with a man like that, well, you'd be in the same position. or my wife, my boss. Change the label, change the name, change the circumstances, but there's always someone or something which we take to be, which we blame as the cause of our anger, the reason why we can't do it. So, this is the reason why Usui Sensei gave us the precept just for today. We take everything step by step. No matter how small the step is, that's the step that we take. Every journey begins with the first step. So it is with the inner journey. Just for today, no anger. So we're left with the question, how, in our own lives, do we put this into practice? How do we begin taking these steps? That it's very, very normal to have all of these so-called human emotions. It's our response to the emotions that's either healthy or unhealthy. You know, if I am angry, that's my problem. The unhealthy response to my anger would be to say, "Now look, you've made me so angry, look what you've done." Yeah. Why do you always make me so angry? Instead of asking myself, why do I always make myself angry when I'm with you? It's not the tiger in the jungle that makes us fearful. It's our fear in the jungle that makes us fearful. The tiger has just given us an excuse for becoming fearful. But the roots of the fear are already there, before the tiger came along. Actually, the person who made us angry, or the tiger who made us fearful, were our guardian angels. They came to remind us that we still have work to do. They came to remind us that we still have the roots of anger in us, that we still have the roots of fear in us. Just for today, no worry. Now that must seem quite simple. In a situation like this, calm, tranquil, the birds, flowers, trees, a gentle breeze. But what about in our everyday life? Just for today, no worry. When we're full of anxiety about our work, when we're fearful, when we're in the middle of a terrible depression, how do we then practice? Just for today, no worry. How do we bring this precept? How do we make it real? How do we make it possible in our everyday life? Step by simple step. Now you thought I was going to leave you, didn't you? Without a solution to all of your anger and worry. But maybe there is one. Both anger and anxiety rise from the same source, which ultimately is fear. Anger is an active response. It's an outgoing response. It mobilizes all of our energies, and up to a point it can make us feel good. On the other hand, anxiety is a curling up, a contraction within, which leaves us feeling without help or hope. At its worst, it becomes despair. This is why when the Buddha was asked, well, what exactly is it that you teach? And the Buddha said, well, I only teach two things. I teach suffering and pain, and I teach the end of suffering and pain. Or I should have said, I teach pain and suffering, and I teach the cessation of pain and suffering. But then not everyone could understand this. They needed a little more explanation and guided, well, how do you do this? So then he said, well, I teach four truths. And the first is the truth of suffering, pain. And the second is the way in which this pain rises up. The cause of it, in other words. And the third is the complete cessation, the complete stopping of all suffering and pain. And the fourth is the path that leads to this, which is the path of practice in everyday life. But this teaching was still too short, because people have a wide variety of tendencies, their nature is different. So he had to teach some people in one way, other people in another way, and so the teaching became expanded into something vast. But the core, the root, the kernel of the teaching is simply becoming absolutely aware of the nature of pain and suffering and absolutely free from it. And what we can gain from that is that essentially the spiritual path is very simple. It's we who demand complications. Our first step is to become more conscious. What puts us into anger? Is it something outside of ourselves, or does it come from the inside? The positive aspect of anger is that it helps us mobilize our energy. And with that energy, mobilized energy, we don't feel small, helpless, hopeless anymore. But there's a negative side as well, isn't there? The anger can do far more harm than good. And then we're left feeling sorry about the anger that we just manifest. This lotus flower gives us a beautiful illustration, doesn't it, of how something which is well rooted in mud arises from it and, opening in the sunlight, becomes a thing of exquisite beauty. Our negative emotions can be transformed just as exquisitely after careful inner cultivation. Let me tell you the story of a big yellow dog that came into my life at just the right moment to teach me an important lesson. This story illustrates how quickly anger can arise and how, just as quickly, it can be transmuted, transformed into something quite beautiful. My encounter with a great master. This great master lived in Thailand and walked on 4 legs. This great spiritual master was a big yellow dog. And I lived in a monastery on top of a little hill. This monastery was very small. It was almost like a little hermitage. And every morning we had to go with our bowls and we visited various farmhouses for food. And every morning I went to one farmhouse, and there, outside the house, were the farmer, his wife, and their dog. And every morning, the dog lay down there with its head between its front legs, showing its very long teeth. And this happened week after week for many weeks, without change. One morning, the dog was lying down peacefully with its nose towards the ground, and it just followed me with its eyes and no sound. And so I had this very arrogant thought, oh, my love meditation must have been very good this morning. And I received the food in my bowl, and then I walked through the fruit trees to the end of the property to visit the next farm. Dividing the two lands was an irrigation canal and a wooden bridge. And just as I reached the bridge, so I felt this terrible pain in my leg. The dog sank its teeth deeply into my muscles. At that moment, I became so angry you couldn't imagine how angry I was. I was furious. I was not just angry. I was murderous. Yeah. And for a moment I had a little fantasy in my head. And in my fantasy, I picked this dog up by its back leg and swinging the dog around my head and letting it fly into the thorn trees. And then my vision was that I'd leave the dog hanging there on these thorns as a punishment for biting me. And these were the thoughts of the peaceful monk. Can you imagine this peaceful Buddhist monk turning into a murderer? But that was the strength of the anger that I felt inside myself. The pain in my leg was so great that the anger that I felt equaled the pain. Energetically, it equaled the pain. Because it was a total surprise, the shock I felt was intense. The anger that I felt and the sense of vengeance that I felt was equally great. And then, of course, because I was a monk, I had been practicing a lot of meditation. I looked at the dog and I saw another aspect of reality. And I realized instantly that that dog was a dog simply because of its doggy karma. It was a dog because it spent its life doing doggy things. Probably lifetime after lifetime after lifetime of dogginess, it was firmly based in a doggy body, with doggy consciousness and doggy teeth. Yeah. And I felt such compassion that there was no possibility of this dog understanding what it was doing to itself. It was stuck in this mess, and it was recreating a new lifetime for itself. And because it was in this lifetime repeating the doggy karma of past lives, it was going to probably have another dog life in its next life. And this was a never-ending chain of lifetimes of limitation and suffering. But when, in a fraction of a second, that changed into compassion for the dog, the experience of passion was equally as great, energetically, as the pain in my leg and the anger that I felt. This was no little thought of, oh, poor little doggy. It was not a thought like that. It was a deep, what can I say? A deep, huge, oceanic feeling of compassion. Yeah. The story doesn't quite end there because the dog slowly retreated with its tail between its legs. But I stood there watching it, sending it loving thoughts. And I had to ask myself, have I ever in my life had a better teacher than that? Yeah. And I had to wonder whether that dog somehow was a deva in disguise. Yeah. The angels do these things from time to time. They disguise themselves as our difficulties. So now my purpose of telling that story is to show you, first of all, I'm not a special person. Show me a negative emotion and I either have it or I've had it. Show me a bad state of consciousness and I know it intimately. But because of my daily meditation, it took only a brief moment to change that murderous consciousness into something very, very beautiful. But I guess it's got something to do with anger, something to do with gratitude, something to do with putting yourself into your practice, and something to do with being kind to another. But I still think that that dog was kinder to me than I was to the dog. And as I walked all the long way back to the monastery, with losing a lot of blood down my leg, that was one of the happiest days of my life. Well, I learned a big lesson for myself from that experience, and I shall always be very grateful to that dog. That's why I refer to it as my master. How difficult it is to practice those first two precepts. But now Usui Sensei gave us 3 precepts which are like a window, which make the first 2, seemingly impossible, possible. So the third precept, Kancha Shite, is just for today, be grateful. Cultivate, for today, the attitude of gratitude. Yes, we can all be grateful when something beautiful happens, when someone does something very wonderful for us. But what about the other times? The more difficult, trying situations in our life. How then do we practice gratitude? So each moment gives us the perfect opportunity to practice, to cultivate the attitude of gratitude in such a way that our heart, our experience grows, expands, until all of the things that we were angry about, worried about in the past become so much less. So I find it's very good to meditate on these 5 precepts, to go deeper, to go behind the words to what is really being said, what is really being asserted. See, kanshashite, be grateful. Develop the attitude of gratitude. See, we can take that in a very simple, everyday sense, but we could take it also in a very profound spiritual sense. In a deep spiritual sense, everything that happens to us, everything that we experience is absolutely right. It's perfect. We could say everything that we experience is our karma, and our karma is our creation. It's the product of our karma factory. See, we're all karma factories. That's what we are. If someone asks you, well, what's your profession? You say, well, I work in my karma factory. And that's what we do. From the moment we wake up in the morning till the moment we go to sleep at night, we work in our karma factory. It's happy karma, it's unhappy karma, it's confused karma, it's clear karma. Yeah. And you see, when we have this false idea of separation, we separate ourselves from the world around us. But actually there is no separation. The world around me is as much me as the person sitting on this cushion. I could say that in another way, that my circumstances are as much me as I am in this body. Just think about that. Yeah. My circumstances are my karma. Do I like my situation or not? If I don't like it, then what must I do in my karma factory? I have to design things a little differently. I have to look at the production line and see if there's something that needs changing. Because if I'm not grateful for what's happening, then it means that I'm not taking responsibility for my creations. If I don't like what's happening in my life, then guess what? When I test weak. So when I'm fighting against what actually is, what I'm experiencing, I'm not being strong, I'm being weak. I'm weakening myself. And so, naturally, from time to time, I get ill. I don't have the strength some days to get out of bed. I have to force myself to get out of bed. I have to force myself to get dressed, force myself to go out of the house to work or to whatever. Because I'm not practicing the attitude of gratitude. You know, all of these difficulties and undesirables that I'm anticipating in my day, if I'm grateful for them, they become my friends. The events that happen, instead of being curses, they become challenges. When I accept them, I'm accepting responsibility for my karma. I'm accepting responsibility for my world, the world in which I find myself. So we hear, for instance, that in some other part of the world there's a war. People are killing one another, mutilating one another, destroying one another. Surely I didn't make that in my karma factory. Not my karma factory. Oh. But we shouldn't be so sure. Could it be that these people in this other country, on this other continent, somewhere else, far distant, are actually fighting out the inner battles of my own consciousness? Could it be that I've spent lifetime after lifetime working in my karma factory? And if that's so, what conflicts have I created in my karma factory over these many, many lifetimes? And if there's no separation between here and there, or then and now, perhaps there's no separation between my past life karma and my present life karma. And so now I see on the television, or I read in the newspaper, about battles, about wars, about mutilations occurring elsewhere in the world. See, what is the world reflecting to me? See, the world is like a mirror, a karma mirror. See, when I go into the bathroom and I look in the mirror, if I don't like what the mirror is showing me, it's no good going out and throwing this mirror away and buying a new mirror. You know, if you get out of bed and you show an angry face to the mirror, what's it going to reflect to you? It's not the mirror's fault. God, I hate this angry mirror. Surely there's got to be a mirror that will show me something more pleasant when I look into it in the morning. Now, what we don't always notice when we see an image of Fudomyo that's sitting on top of this ferocious face with big teeth coming up and down, arr, is a lotus flower on his head. The symbol of purity, perfection, and peace. Mm-hmm. And it's at that moment of sitting on the edge of the precipice, without fighting Fudomyo, with greeting Fudomyo, with the essence of gratitude, with the perfection of gratitude, that the lotus flower is seen in all of its beauty, and we perceive heaven on this earth. And so this is in response to your question about cancer, but it could be any personal or national disaster. We can face it lying down, or we can say, sit me up. I don't know if that helps as an answer to your question. Yeah. At that moment, sometimes the cancer will disappear. But if that is the end of a lifetime, then that's the end of a lifetime. The only tragedy there is not in losing a life, but in not stepping from time into the timeless. That is the real tragedy. But what's the truth? Yeah. See, the mirror reflects what I put out. The world reflects what I put out. If I don't like the reflection in the mirror, what do I need to do? Perhaps I should actually begin to practice the 5 precepts And it's not just these 5 precepts of Reiki, but any spiritual precepts. These are all they all have the same effect. Reiki is the energy of nature, and here we are in nature, feeling, appreciating and being the energy of nature, the universe. How great, how large is the universe? This energy is absolutely identical to our own energy. Kyodake wa, just for today, kanshashite, be grateful. What does it mean to be grateful? How are we grateful? We say yes, simply. Reiki teaches us the great lesson of yes, saying yes to the world, saying yes to whatever arrives. It's working through and working with whatever nature presents us with, whatever life presents us with, that makes the heart great, without resistance, saying yes, yes, I'm grateful for this experience, whatever it is. Even the coldness, the wind, which is sometimes uncomfortable, the cold which freezes our hands, our fingers, our toes, even these things have something to give. It's part of the richness of life. Just for today, be grateful. Just for today, be grateful to all of the wondrous possibilities that the world has for us. Gyo Hagime. Work hard, put yourself into what you're doing, is not, for most of us, a very easy practice. You know, many of us resist most of our everyday life. Gyo Hagime. Work hard. Do whatever you're doing with all of the energy you have. That's the meaning of this precept. This precept, Gyo Hagime, just for today, work hard, is the powerhouse which drives all of the other precepts. Without this, nothing. Because it means that we need to put our energy, put our heart, put all of our intention into what it is that we're doing. Whether it be our daily work to earn money, whether it be looking after our family, whether it means playing a sport, whatever it means. You see, it's the Gyo Hagime, work hard, that drives the other precepts along. We work hard at the practice of not being angry. We work hard at the practice of not worrying. We take them seriously and we don't give in too easily to these negative emotions. We work hard at the practice of gratitude. We work hard to develop kindness. We can have fun working hard. It doesn't have to be serious, but it means energetically doing whatever it is we need to be doing. That's the purpose, the meaning of this precept. Now, let's go further onto our journey into the precepts. You know, being in a wild spot in nature like this reminds me that in everyday life, no matter whether in nature or in a city, we often have occasion to practice all 5 of the precepts at the same time. It's not that we always have to select one precept to be the special one to practice for the day or for the occasion. And if you'll bear with me for a while, I'd like to tell you a story of a time when I was in a very dangerous situation in nature, and where 3 at least of the precepts were to be practiced fully at that time. I was once living, meditating in a cave high on a mountain in Thailand. I relied on a little village of hill tribes people for my food every morning. And these people were not Buddhists, but they very graciously offered to support me every morning. When I went into their village with my bowl, they would put in rice and whatever it is that they were eating themselves. And this continued for some weeks, and I meditated and practiced, but it was low voltage practice, you know. Life was very simple, not very comfortable, but just comfortable enough to be okay. One day I went into the village with my bowl as usual. I stood there in the middle of the village, and I noticed everyone running away and hiding. Oh, what's wrong with me this morning? And I covered my bowl, turned round, walked back to the cave. The next day the same thing happened, and again and again and again. So although I had not intended to fast, in fact, I had no food. But I became weaker and weaker until after a time my legs swelled up, and I couldn't walk without 2 big bamboo poles. By this time it was taking me 2 hours to go to the village and 2 hours to get back. And one day I got into the village, and there were the little pigs and chickens and all the animals of the village. Because my body was starving and I was already suffering from what I realized was beriberi, I looked at these little pigs and chickens and thinking, oh, this one's getting fatter. They're going to kill this and cook it, and maybe they'll give some to me. And at the instant I thought that thought, I realized this is not the thought of a Buddhist monk. Yeah. And I was absolutely horrified and disgusted with myself. And I did not stand in the middle of the village with my bowl open. I turned round and walked straight the way back to my cave. Because as a monk, if I had received any food offered to me in that consciousness, I would have taken that food as a thief, and I wouldn't be able to eat it. And as I struggled back towards the cave, walking with my 2 bamboo poles, painful step by step, the thought came to me, this is the end. That, you know, I can't stay alive. Not only did I have no food, but also I had no water. Because my water was from a little spring, and I had to go down a steep, wet, slippery slope. But on my way back from the village that morning, I reached a point on the path when I had a great surge of anger. I can only describe it as anger. A great surge of anger inside me. Yeah. And I was angry that it should happen in this way. And as this feeling of anger came up, it was about to come out of my mouth as a bellow of rage. But once it reached my mouth, it transformed. And out came the Pali words, the words of the Buddha. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Virupake hime metang metang erapate hime Chabya pute hime metang metang kanha kotamake hicha Aparake hime metang metang diparake hime Chatupate hime metang metang bohupate hime Mamang aparako hingsi mamang hingsi diparako Mamang chatupato hingsi mamang hingsi bohupato. Perfect is the teaching of the Buddha. And with that moment, I not only had strength in my body, but it's as though the whole pathway were lit up with light. At that moment, I was no longer fighting against karma. At that moment, the karma factory took a moment's holiday. And I went back to my cave and realized that what this experience was teaching me was that now I really had to practice. Gyo hageme. Just for today, work hard. Yeah. Because I fully believed that there would be no tomorrow. I did not expect there to be a tomorrow for me. So how could I waste one single moment? The cave in which I lived was a tunnel. So that I had to go down on my belly to go inside. And on the inside, the cave opened to a huge cavern. There's stalactites, stalagmites, and several thousand bats. It was absolutely pitch black in the inner cave. And this was my meditation temple. Now, you know, in a limestone cave, all of the limestone comes from the bones, the shells of small creatures who died under the sea a long, long time ago. And so I saw my life in relation to the birth, the death, 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 endlessly through millions, maybe billions of years of little creatures, and I saw no difference between my bones and the bones which formed the cave. And I saw my own life in exactly the same way, as an endless succession of birth and death and 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 birth and death continue for the next 24 hours, because that's how it appeared to me in the cave. An endless ocean of birth and death. And the present moment, the present lifetime, was essentially no different from any other lifetime. There was absolutely nothing at all special about this lifetime that would distinguish it from the lifetime of those billions of little creatures who died to form the mountain in which I was living. The only difference was the opportunity that I had at this moment to step out of this cycle. As I practiced, and my practice got stronger, so the strength of my body began coming back. And at night, it was absolutely impossible to sleep. I had no need for sleep. I didn't even know, I thought to myself, oh, it's time to go to sleep, but I didn't know how to do it, if you see what I mean. There was no way that I could sleep, because I was so awake and so conscious. And I could see every moment of thought exactly as it arose. And I could feel the flavor of a thought before it produced itself, before it actually became a thought. And so I could see, I could feel, I could taste whether this thought was helpful or not helpful. And if it was not helpful, I could just drop it. And that was a very special 24 hours for me. I had not planned it. If anyone had told me that that's what I'd have to experience on the mountain, I would never have gone on the mountain in the first place. You know, like everyone else, I like an easy, comfortable life. It's just that I put myself in a position where I had no control over the outer circumstances. What happened was quite miraculous, because just after midday, the next day, I was still alive, and two of the villagers came with bamboo poles over their shoulders and little baskets, one on each end, one containing rice and the other containing vegetables, whatever else. And they went to offer me this food, and I was very clear that I couldn't accept it, because a Buddhist monk in Thailand is allowed to eat between dawn and midday. And this was about 1 p.m. But they saw my condition, and they went down and got some water for me, so at least I had water now. And so I had another 24 hours of a very special meditation. And the next day they came back, two other people came back and brought a feast fit for a king. They brought food that they don't even have themselves on normal days. They brought delicacies that they would normally reserve only for the children and the women. Sadly, dawn being dawn, from that moment on my meditation grew less and less intense as I lost the edge of the precipice. The desperation had gone, and as I became more and more comfortable, so I took things more and more easily. So like us all, I have to face the edge of the precipice again whenever it comes, in whatever form it happens to take. The two precepts. Kanshishite, be grateful. Gyo hagime, work hard. This is our life. A special, we either make it special or not special. The only one who can make this a special life and manifest the power and the glory of heaven on earth is you and I. Well, that was a little adventure of mine. But you know, you don't have to be in nature or to be in danger in order to practice the 5 precepts. The greatest heroes are the ones who practice in their everyday lives, even in their own home, overcoming the regular difficulties that life presents us with. Now, in the story that I told you, when I was fearful of my life, and you'll remember I turned away from a village without receiving food, thinking that for sure I'd be dead that day, I became very fearful, and as a result of that fear, I became angry at my situation, angry at having put myself into that situation. Because of my practice of diligent practice of my meditation, because of working hard on my spiritual path, because of what I was doing fully every day in the mountains, because of my gratitude for the situation that life had presented me with, instantly the fear and the anger disappeared. And then later in the story you'll remember that when the villagers brought me exquisite food to eat, I was filled with gratitude, so absolutely full of gratitude at their kindness. So you see, all of the 5 precepts are demonstrated in this one story, and so it is in life. So finally we come to the very simplest of the 5 precepts. Hito ni shinsetsu ni. Be kind. Be kind to others. Sounds like that's the easy one. What does it mean to be kind to others? It's such a small word, and yet it has such a vast meaning. I mean, what does kindness look like? You know, it has many different faces. For instance, when someone has hurt us in the past, we can either forgive them or not forgive them. Only one of those is being kind. And to forgive is the most generous thing we can do. Yeah. You know, in Buddhism, the very first of the moral precepts is generosity, known as dana, which is closely connected to the Latin dona. So dana is to give, or it's, as a noun, generosity. And the highest form of generosity is to forgive, often the most difficult. We'd rather give someone our money than our heart. Why is it so difficult to forgive? It's because we hold tightly to the notion of our own guilt. At the moment that people on earth got into their heads the strange idea about good and bad, they seized on the idea of their own guilt. And what could be a greater guilt than that? So we sit stewing in a stew pot of guilt. And because it's so intolerable to carry around this burden of guilt in ourselves, we try to relieve the burden a little by dumping our guilt on others. Doesn't it feel good when we do that? You know, when we make someone else feel guilty? Look what you've done to me. If there's no one who is guilty in our life, we'll find some excuse to put guilt on someone or something. Were it not for my father and mother, I could have been a happy person. In fact, most tribal wars, which then become national wars, which then become intercontinental wars, world wars, begin with non-forgiving. But the whole of this unforgivingness is the practice of unkindness. Just to turn in our heart from being unkind to being kind. And there's no imposition of guilt anywhere. And the moment we drop all notions of guilt, the unimaginable beauty of perfect innocence is here and all around. We're not separate from perfect innocence except in our imagination. And we approach that innocence every time we think, speak, act kindly towards another. Now, once a long time ago in Singapore, I watched an old man riding one of these things, pushing his 2 passengers up a hill, pushing really hard, trying to get up the hill. He's sweating, struggling with might and main, with his passengers sitting very comfortably, relaxed in the front without a care in the world. And suddenly, from nowhere, comes a young man. He stands behind the trishaw and he pushes silently, unbeknown to the old man. And suddenly, the old man's feet go faster and faster, his load feels lighter, and he gets to the top of the hill without understanding how it could possibly be that for the first time in his old life, he's come up this hill so quickly. Just for today, be kind to others. There's thousands of opportunities that we have every day to be kind. We only don't make use of them because we don't even notice them much of the time. We need to just be here in the moment, observing the world, being conscious of the world, and what can we do at this moment to lighten someone's burden, to make someone's life easier, to make someone's life happier. Just for today, be kind. Observe, look, and you'll see thousands of possibilities for little acts of kindness which don't depend on any kind of return. By this means, step by step, little by little, we transform not only our world, but the world around us into a world that's absolutely magnificent. And this is the value of all of these precepts. So, when looking at this precept, we can see that there's no limit to its application. And what we have to remind ourselves is that we cannot truly be ourselves, experience ourselves, or express ourselves without being kind to others. Hito ni shinsetsu ni. Hito. Hito is a person. Be kind to other people. This is also the practice of coherence, the coherence of interrelationships. If we're being unkind to others, what are we doing? Is it that we're trying to establish a disequilibrium between us? Am I trying to make myself bigger or more important than the other person? And what happens on the contrary when we are kind to others? It doesn't even matter whether that particular person reflects our kindness to us or not. You know, sometimes we're very kind to a person and they don't even recognize our kindness. They just are very impolite and very discourteous in return. That's just the way things are sometimes. But the world in general will reflect back in miraculous ways the kindness that we show to that person. So unexpected, beautiful things happen. And we think, how wonderful. How could this happen to me? But at some time or other, we acted in a kind manner towards others. We've seen how keeping the precepts is a real challenge, even though they seem to be very simple. Who but a saint could not get angry during the day? Who but a saint could not worry? Who but a saint could be grateful for every single moment that happens? What we need is a bridge that we can use to cross from total impotence in relation to these 5 precepts to a place where we've grown, expanded in consciousness, our heart is grown greater. I'm going to give you such a bridge. Japan's very mountainous. The mountains are the major feature of the countryside of Japan. And there are many who go into the mountains to pursue their spiritual practice, to practice for the martial arts, or just to be at one with nature. This practice I call Tenchi Mai. And I learned this from a master who had just completed a 1,000-day practice in the mountains. Not a fasting retreat, but a practice where every day he stood for a time under a waterfall. No matter the sun was shining, the rain was pouring down, or in winter it's snowing, every day for 1,000 days he practiced like this. He arrived at this big, powerful waterfall. And then he would practice Tenchi Mai on a flat rock in front of the waterfall. Then he would climb down the rocks into the river, and then he'd practice Tenchi Mai again with his body in the cold water of the river. And then he would go and stand under the waterfall, which is enormously powerful. But when he went under the waterfall, he was no longer separate from the waterfall. When I went under the waterfall, I was fighting against the waterfall. And in the afternoon, he received patients for healing. But he would not practice healing without first going up the mountain to the waterfall, cleaning the temple, the path, all of this. Yeah. So every person, every sick person who came to him received the full benefit of his practice. Let's go now into the practice. And it begins with Gasho. Gasho is a gesture of respect. And every step of this practice begins again with Gasho. We need to practice respectfully, gratefully, and without arrogance. 10, literally it means heaven. It means the sky above, it means the weather, it means all of the forces and power of heaven that we can experience in the countryside, in the mountains. But heaven, of course, also means the heaven within. It means the very highest state of our mind, our most elevated thoughts, our highest feelings towards one another and towards the world. Chi is the earth. It means the ground on which we stand. It means the mountains. It means the trees. It means the great oceans. What does it feel like to be a tree? What does it feel like to be a mountain? Feel it as you practice. Mai means in front. It also means to extend. And just as a tree extends its branches, So we extend through our arms, our fingertips, and we visualize as far as we can. We extend our vision in our consciousness right in front of us of heaven on earth. Yoko means sideways and all around. And we extend our thoughts, our consciousness through our arms beyond our fingertips without limit in every direction around us. We remember no separation. We remember that we're not in any way separate from this that we call the world. It's only in our imagination that we separate ourselves. Yoko, as with all of the other steps in this practice, reminds us of non-separation, that there is in fact no separation between us and the world. In big cities, it's all too easy to forget our connection with nature. We forget that we are not only a part of nature, but we're at one with it. So when we practice Ten, Chi, Mai, Yoko, then when we put our hands up, we need to work inside ourselves to raise our consciousness to its full and highest potential. And so it's for each of us to find a pathway to doing that, find a means to doing that. Just as when we learn to drive a vehicle, at the beginning we are learner drivers, and then we become more experienced. And if we're very careful and have a lot of practice, we can become expert drivers. And so it is with our life. We can either live our lives as beginners, or we can become more skillful. Now, you have the idea, that we need to do whatever we need to do to raise our consciousness when we practice 10. So it is that we could sit in meditation and practice as a meditation all of the ideas that we express in Tenchi Mai. See, how much can I hold in my hands? And how much more can I hold in here? How much more does the ocean hold? And how much more can the space of heaven hold? If our consciousness is comparable to the capacity of our hands, we can hold only few blessings. It's not that there's any limit to the blessings available. It's just that the container is too small to hold it all. So as we practice something like Ten Chi Mai and expand our consciousness, as we practice the Gokai, the 5 precepts, and expand our consciousness, so the container becomes bigger. And we can hold, we can contain more blessings and greater blessing. So, Ten, Chi, Mai, Yoko. But when we act them out in our body, that physical action amplifies the thought. So now, not only our thoughts, but also our words, and our physical action, and the whole of our nervous system is aligned with these thoughts. So gradually, we become these thoughts. We manifest these thoughts as our life, as our daily behavior. And in this way, not only does the practice of Tenchi Mai reinforce the Gokai, the 5 precepts, but the practice of the 5 precepts reinforces our meditation with Tenchi Mai. Both of these practices, when we work at them regularly on a daily basis, they support and strengthen our practice of Reiki. When we elevate our thoughts, when we elevate our consciousness, we approach the higher potential of who we are. And this is represented by the 10. And as we do this, our life begins to reflect back to us a little more of the taste, the flavor of heaven. That allows more heavenly experiences, more happy, beautiful experiences to occur in our life. We start having the most amazing encounters with other people. We meet people we never expected to meet. Just the person we needed to meet in order to take the next step in our life. Just the person we needed to meet to close a certain hole or gap in our life where something was missing. Have you heard the expression, when the student is ready, the master appears? And it's having met with Ono-san and having practiced with him for a few days, that I could just in a small way begin to understand the practice of Usui Sensei. Well, that's what I think, right or wrong. You know, I'm not a master. I'm just the one who follows the master, little by little. I'll show you a master of Japanese calligraphy. What she's doing appears so simple, and yet in that piece of writing is contained the essence of the 5 precepts. Do you see what I mean? The challenge of these 5 precepts is to reach a point of mastery in our everyday life. What has influenced Japan very considerably is the institution and the practice of the Gokai, of the 5 precepts. Usui Sensei and other spiritual leaders have obviously emphasized these because they could see the need for them. And where people practice them, there is generally a healing atmosphere. And that when we act with love and compassion, we are acting absolutely in a line, in harmony with our true nature. In this is the healing power of Reiki and the healing power of these 5 precepts. See, if we could honestly say with absolute truth that since coming to Reiki, we had never once stepped outside of these 5 precepts, by the power of this truth may you be healed, no need for hand positions, no need for symbols, no need for anything. but a general principle, to a general pathway to leading us ever upwards, is the practice of the 5 precepts. I was with a great spiritual master in Thailand once, and he'd say, to be born as a human is absolutely wonderful and perfect, because you have a choice. You know, you can be in a human body, but you can act as an angel. You can act as a being of light. You can even be absolutely enlightened and free. Or you could choose to live your life as an animal. You could choose to live your life as a demon. And there are those who make that choice. You could live your life as a human being, as though you were suffering in the greatest hell. Suffering torture after torture after torture, mutilation, torture, again and again. All these things are here as part of the whole picture of human experience. And just as there's a path downwards, there's also a path up. And the path of the Gokai, the 5 precepts, is part of the path up. And the consequence of that and our other spiritual practices is that we can become a healing presence in a world of pain. I'd like you to think for a moment of the division in the 5 precepts in the Gokai. See, the first 2 tell you what you should not do. Don't get angry and don't worry. Almost impossible to do this. But you see, the next 3 are all designed to assist the practice of the first 2. And you remember that Usui Sensei suggested that we should chant this first thing in the morning and also last thing before we go to bed. And gradually, as we do this, it becomes part of who we are, especially if we chant with full consciousness and with a clear intention that this is our practice for the day. Yeah. I found that over the years, many years now, that I've gradually come to understand what it was that Usui Sensei was teaching just through practicing, teaching, and listening. And the thing is, what struck me then is the fact that we can't be kind to others unless we're observant. We have to make ourselves aware of another person's need. It means that we can't walk around the world in our own little bubble of self. And in many Western cities, that's how people are. We make a practice of not being aware of other people just because there are too many other people. The spirit of these 5 precepts is there in consciousness. And many, many years ago, maybe about 15 or even more years ago, I taught Reiki to a gentleman from Switzerland. And some weeks later, I received a telephone call. Don, do you practice Reiki or are you Reiki? And after that question, he put down the phone, leaving me with a very important meditation. One of the best lessons I've ever learned. Or should I say, one of the best lessons that I'm in the process of learning. You know, I'm sure that I have the very best students in the world. Just the students that I need for my own practice, my own growth. When we are Reiki and not simply practicing Reiki, then we become a healing presence in the world. Then our essence is the essence of Reiki. I believe this is something worth meditating with for all of us. I'm very aware that everything I say is very incomplete, and just about each comment that I make could be the subject of a whole weekend seminar. Be grateful. Just be grateful. Be grateful for life. Be grateful for what happens. Take your life experiences as your teacher, your master. See, and for me, from my point of view, this is essential practice to support our growth in Reiki. See, it's not enough just to go and get an initiation and then continue to live a careless life. And that's why it's good to remember the history of Usui Sensei and his struggles and trials on the mountain. And what little part of that are we willing to do? Habitual pathways die if totally unused. Unwanted habits, if unstimulated, fall by the wayside. But they have great power simply because they've been exercised regularly, if not constantly. We become, as the Buddha once said, whatever we cultivate and make much of. It's our great good fortune that new behavioral pathways can be cultivated. And that is the purpose behind the daily practice of the Gokai and Ten Chi Mai. With the aid of a practice such as this, a great-heartedness in which the downward spiraling confusion of conflict, of dim and diminished awareness, is arrested. Body-mind can be restored to their essential harmony and brilliance. In the practice, we find an elegant simplicity, profound in its aim and effect. And with this said, there remains no more but to wish you bon voyage on your journey with Reiki through life. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We should walk into the sunset. We should walk into the sunset.
Yeah?
As the sun goes down, we walk away
Oh,
to live
yeah.
happily ever after.
Yes.
In tent, watching